Alright, let's look at Standard 15, Substandard C. Explain Wilson's 14 points and the proposed League of Nations. And let's turn back here to the STEM. It says the student will analyze the origins and impact of the United States involvement in World War I. So here we're talking about the end of the war, 14 points, Wilson's 14 points, and a proposed League of Nations. So our focus is on the 14 points, and then the proposed League of Nations, which is a part of the 14 points. So our elements are Versailles Treaty of 1919 that ends World War I. This is going to end that war. 14 points, which is Wilson's plan for peace. League of Nations, which is the 14th point. And then isolationism, that word isolationism. Conflict and compromise, social and political interactions, and beliefs and ideas like isolationism. Wilson had a plan to end all future, or to prevent, let's say prevent. Let's change that to end. They ain't even started yet. Prevent future world wars. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points were in the Treaty of Versailles that he helped write, or he wrote. And in the Treaty of Versailles, his 14 points within the treaty call for a plan to 14 points. There's a plans to prevent future world wars. So a world war will never happen again. Alright, so his plan for world peace, and the goal was to prevent future world wars, and a part of it was the League of Nations. In the end, the United States does not approve the treaty and does not join the League of Nations. And the reason why, and you need to know this for the test, or the EOCT, U.S. citizens and congressmen wanted to remain isolated from European affairs, and this isolationism goes in line with this isolated part here. Alright, so what does isolationism mean? A decision to be neutral in matters of war or interference with foreign nations, concerned with domestic issues instead of international ones. That would be a good definition. Characteristics to remain neutral: don't take sides in foreign affairs, stay out of that, mind your own business. An example would be what George Washington told us to do in a farewell address: avoid entangling alliances with other countries. Non-examples would be our imperialism, definitely, at beginning of 1898, 1900, open door policy or big stick diplomacy under Roosevelt. The League of Nations would definitely be a non-example of isolationism if we joined it. United Nations today is a non-example. War I, World War II. If we look at the 14 points, there's 14 of them. You know, to prevent future world wars, you got to attack what caused it. No secret treaties. You remember those secret system of alliances? You know, freedom from movement on the sea, trade between countries, and you can read these. But the 14th one is what's most important for us right now: the League of Nations to settle disputes. So the essential question will be, what is the League of Nations? It's one of the 14 points here, one of his plans within the Treaty of Versailles, the last one. And to answer that, the League of Nations, the definition would be an international peacekeeping organization. And here's a picture of the first one that opened up November 15th, 1920 in Geneva, Switzerland. And this is opening session of the League of Nations. So it basically works as an international court. All these people here are sitting in this international forum that when any two countries have a dispute or problem with one another, they would take it before this all the members of the League of Nations. And these members are representatives from different countries. I think there's 129 members in the League of Nations when it was opened up. And if two countries had a problem, they'd bring it before this group of countries, of the world's countries' representatives, and they would try to negotiate a settlement and prevent war with those two countries. So that's what the purpose of the League of Nations was. The problem was, in the United States, some senators did not like the League of Nations idea. One particular individual, U.S. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, didn't like the fact that if war broke out in the world, that the United States was forced, under Wilson's 14 points, the League of Nations article, it was forced to go to war with other nations to prevent wars, in other words, to send troops abroad. He didn't like this idea, and he proposed as a reservationist. He didn't like it, but he would ratify the treaty if changes and alterations were made. And he proposed an alteration or change known as Article 10, and he said that in this, adding this provision would allow the League of Nations to make war in the world, to prevent world war, without the participation of the United States or agreement by U.S. Congress. In other words, the United States would not have to participate or send troops. But Woodrow Wilson refused. The President, Woodrow Wilson, refused to compromise on this. And so he turns against the Treaty of Versailles, Henry Cabot Lodge, as a reservationist. Another group called the Irreconcilables just did not like it, were not willing to negotiate, were not willing to make, they just were bitter opponents to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. 12 to 18 senators who fought tirelessly to defeat ratification of the treaty, and they're going to succeed. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 will not be ratified by the United States. The war will end. The treaty would be accepted everywhere else, but not in the United States. And the United States never joins the League of Nations. Back when we talked about checks and balances under the United States Constitution, before a treaty can be ratified, the United States President can go abroad, which he did. He went to Europe, and he drew up this treaty called the Treaty of Versailles, and in it 14 beautiful points to prevent future world war. But when he finishes the treaty, he has to bring it back. This is part of checks and balances, and send the treaty to the United States Senate. And the United States Senate in the Constitution has to ratify the treaty with a 2/3 vote. And U.S. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge tried to add Article X in there and try to get it ratified that way as a reservationist. It failed. The vote failed there for him. And then on June 28, 1919, there were only 84 senators present to vote, and we needed 2/3 vote of those 84. So you had to have 56, and the way you get that is you divide 84 by 3, the bottom number, and then you get a number, and then you multiply that number by 2, and that will give you 56. Okay? And you needed 56 out of these 84 votes would be a 2/3 vote of the Senate. But when the vote went through, only 49 senators approved it. 35 disapproved of it. So it's 6 votes short of ratification. And this is the first time in U.S. history that the Senate rejected the peace treaty. And Woodrow Wilson was very upset about this. Not too long afterward, he's gonna pass away, but he was very upset. Spent a lot of energy trying to get this treaty ratified with the United States. A lot of people, like Senator Henry Cabot Lodge and these irreconcilables, felt that being a part of the League of Nations was unconstitutional. And here's a little cartoon here shows Uncle Sam. Constitution of the United States, and it's like a puzzle. It doesn't fit in with the proposed League of Nations Constitution. They thought it was unconstitutional because the League could send U.S. troops into war without Congress's consent. And a lot of Americans felt that that was unconstitutional because only Congress had the sole power to declare war. So the opposition to the League of Nations, these senators believed that the League of Nations would lead to further involvement of foreign affairs. And we see this little rabbit here, the League of Nations, and we see this huge snake which says international strife on it, and thought that, you know, the League of Nations would draw the United States into other worldly affairs. And so a lot of them did not like the idea of being drawn into other issues. And we see this in this cartoon here. Here's Henry Cabot Lodge here. Here's the Treaty of Versailles all beat up, leaving the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs, which is what is the committee that ratifies treaties. The staunchest opponent to this, without the Amendment X, was Henry Cabot Lodge, and he's depicted here, where they did not approve the treaty. And let's look at a quote by Henry Cabot Lodge and see why he refused it. It says, "I have never had but one allegiance. I cannot divide it now. I have loved but one flag, and I cannot share that devotion and give affection to the mongrel banner invented for a league. Internationalism, illustrated by the Bolshevik and by the men to whom all countries are alike, provided they can make money out of them, is to me repulsive. And we're going to talk about what Bolshevik means in a few minutes. But here he is saying this. What he's saying here is he has one devotion to one flag, not internationally. To me, that represents isolationism. This idea of isolationism is the reason why the Treaty of Versailles failed. Let's look at another quote he had. He said, and this is all in the same speech. He says, "National, I must remain. And in that way, I, like all other Americans, can render the amplest service to the world. The United States is the world's best hope. But if you fetter her in the interest and quarrels of other nations, if you tangle her in the intrigues of Europe, you will destroy her power for good and endanger her very existence. Leave her to march freely through the centuries to come as in the years that have gone." So leave her to march freely. In this, we see this. He's against internationalism, against this League of Nations. I would deduce this to he is isolated. He wants to remain isolated or isolationist from worldly and not from worldly affairs. Don't entangle her or wrap her in the quarrels or fetter her to the interests and quarrels of other nations. All right, and then here's another quote. "Our first ideal in our country," and we see her in the future as in the past, giving service to all people and to the world. Our ideal of the future is that she should continue to render that service of her own free will. She has great problems of her own to solve, very grim and perilous problems. In other words, we need to take care of issues at home before issues abroad. Isolationism. And then lastly, he says, that's his word, so I'm going to leave it as it is. "We would not have our politics distracted," the United States politics, "and embittered by the dissensions of other lands. We would not have our country's vigor exhausted or her moral force abated by everlasting and meddling and muddling in every quarrel, great and small, which afflicts the world." To me, this equates to isolationism. And so we see in this cartoon here that the Senate rejected the League of Nations. Here you can look at the symbolism. Here is the League of Nations. The Senate is asleep here and ignoring it. And so we see that Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations is going to live, and it's going to eventually evolve into the United Nations after World War II. Roosevelt is going to call for the creation of it. But here we see all these member nations here, but in the pink it says non-members. And if you look at the United States, as a non-member of the League of Nations that was created by President Woodrow Wilson. And in this we see that our U.S. foreign policy has changed once more. With George Washington, he promoted neutrality, which is the same as saying isolationism, all these years. And then in 1898, with our expansionism, we entered into expanding out into the world, sticking our nose into worldly affairs, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. But then after the war's over with, at the Treaty of Versailles, the Americans want to return to isolationism. And we will remain in isolationism from the Treaty of Versailles 1919 until Pearl Harbor is attacked on December 7th, 1941. And then that will be the last time we remain isolationist. And so, have we met our objective? And our objective was to explain Wilson's 14 points in the proposed League of Nations. I think we have. Ask questions in class. Good luck on the quiz, the test, and the EOCT. So our elements are Versailles Treaty of 1919 that ends World War I. This is going to end that war. 14 points, which is Wilson's plan for peace. League of Nations, which is the 14th point of the United States involvement in World War I. So here we're talking about the end of the war. 14 points, Wilson's 14 points. and a proposed League of Nations. So our focus is on the 14 points, and then the proposed League of Nations, which is a part of the 14 points. And then isolationism, that word isolationism, conflict and compromise, social and political interactions, and beliefs and ideas like isolationism. Wilson had a plan to end all future, or to prevent, let's say prevent. Alright, let's look at Standard 15, Substandard C. Explain Wilson's 14 points and the proposed League of Nations. And let's turn back here to the STEM. It says the student will analyze the origins and impact. Let's change that to end. They ain't even started yet. Prevent future world wars. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points were in the Treaty of Versailles that he helped write, or he wrote, and in the Treaty of Versailles his 14 points